'Twas the night before Christmas, or it may be Christmas when you're watching this, depending on if you're watching this the day after or you celebrate Christmas on the 24th. And it's now time we revisit the ghosts of Christmas past. Well, if you're a Borussia Dortmund fan. So I thought, sticking to the spirit of Christmas, instead of giving you a Christmas themed video, today we'll look back on the 23-24 season when Dortmund threw away the title on the final day of the season. Because what more brings Christmas cheer?
Have we just witnessed the big moment?
Heading into the 22-23 season, Dortmund had spent big as they looked to finally make a push for the title, and especially after quite a rubbish season under Marco Rose. So Sebastian Haller, Karim Adeyemi and Nico Schlotterbeck all arrived for big fees from Ajax, Red Bull Salzburg and Freiburg, while what seemed like a coup at the time was the arrival of Niklas Süle on a free transfer from Bayern Munich. All were expected to make an impact. Haller was expected to replace Erling Haaland, who had left in the summer. Karim Adeyemi would add a new dynamic to the attack, which was missing. Nico Schlotterbeck was one for the future and could also play a role in the defence at the time, while Niklas Süle was meant to be the one that brought like this ability to win a title, as well as complement the likes of Mats Hummels and bring leadership to the Dortmund defence. When it came to the signing of Haller, obviously, as I said, he was meant to replace the goals of Haaland, especially due to his previous form with Eintracht Frankfurt in the Bundesliga. However, during the pre-season training camp, after several checks, it was revealed the striker had been diagnosed with testicular cancer and he would not play for the club until the new year because he had to go through the whole treatment process of the surgery and then the resulting chemotherapy as well. Then the head coach at the time was Edin Terzic, who took permanent charge in the summer of 2022 after initially being caretaker in 2020-21 when they won the Pokal, then in a director role during the sole season that Marco Rose was in charge. Obviously, talk at the time said maybe this was planned, that Terzic was always going to become the permanent head coach. And Dortmund had a mixed start to the season. They won their first two games, but signs of what is the old Dortmund was still there. When they would throw away games, they were winning quite comfortably and just make life for themselves very difficult, which will be a common theme throughout this video. But this was best shown in the third game of the season when they were leading 2-0 up until the 89th minute against newly promoted Werder Bremen. Then in the final 7 minutes of the game, they would end up losing 3-2. And Dortmund would end up having a strange Hinrunde, losing to the likes of RB Leipzig, Union Berlin and Cologne, while also leaving it late to draw 2-2 with Bayern Munich, thanks to a goal from Anthony Modeste. Heading into the World Cup break, because this is when Qatar hosted the World Cup and it was hosted halfway through the season, Dortmund would find themselves in 6th, following back-to-back losses to both Wolfsburg and Borussia Mönchengladbach, the final one being a 5-2 loss at Borussia Park in their final game before players headed to Qatar. They were left 9 points off of league leaders Bayern Munich. Dortmund have a similar lead at the moment now as well, but do you back them winning from here? No. But if you want to understand how weird this season was, the top 4 at that time consisted of Freiburg, RB Leipzig, Eintracht Frankfurt, and then Union Berlin were in 5th. And Freiburg were only 4 points off of Bayern Munich at this point. But in the winter, Dortmund signed Julian Ryerson, who could play from Union Berlin, who could play as both a left back and a right back, which should help the team greatly going forward because, as you would know, fullback has been, and kind of still is, apart from Daniel Svensson and Ryerson now, a bit of an issue for Dortmund. Following the restart of the Bundesliga after the World Cup, Dortmund would then go on a 10-game unbeaten run, winning 9 of those games, except a 2-2 draw with Schalke, which again, they were leading 2-1 and allowed Schalke to come back into the game. During Dortmund's winning run, Bayern would end up drawing 3 games in a row against Leipzig, Cologne and Frankfurt before losing to Gladbach and Leverkusen. Obviously, that Leverkusen has some significance as it was kind of the moment where Xabi Alonso and Leverkusen kind of solidified themselves of what they could potentially achieve and what their potential is. And this allowed Dortmund to leapfrog them Bayern into first to set up a big game between the two after the international break in March in Munich. To make matters more interesting, during the break, Bayern ended up firing head coach Julian Nagelsmann and replacing him with Thomas Tuchel. And then the collapse kind of continued. The game against Bayern still had to happen, and like Dortmund's record in Munich at the time, they wilted and would lose the game 4-2 to allow Bayern to leapfrog them again to climb back to the top of the table. With 8 games remaining, the pair would more or less match each other, but as the Bundesliga rules state, Dortmund were never able to take advantage of a Bayern slip-up. Matchday 28, Bayern would draw 1-1 with Hoffenheim, but Dortmund would concede a late equaliser to draw 3-3 with Stuttgart after they had scored a late winner in that, or what was seemed to be a late winner. Another standout game from this run was against Bochum, where Dortmund drew 1-1 and could have won this game too. Then a saving grace for Dortmund. RB Leipzig would beat Bayern 3-1, meaning a win against Augsburg, and they would leapfrog Bayern heading into the final game of the season. And I will say this on the Leipzig-Bayern game, as a neutral, probably the greatest feeling I've ever experienced in my life. Knowing that, Bayern may not have won the league. Against all odds, Dortmund would win this game 3-0, meaning heading into the final game, they had a 2-point lead over Bayern, but the holders would have a better goal difference. It's worth noting that a protagonist during this run in the second half of the season was Sebastian Haller. The Ivorian had made a full recovery from cancer and would score 9 and assist 5 in 19 Bundesliga games, and played a big role in some of Dortmund's wins over the season, over the time he played, such as against Augsburg in the previous game, while Rafael Guerreiro, mainly used as a left-back before, had found a new lease of life in midfield, and again played a key role for Dortmund in helping them really scrape through some wins during this half of the season. The final game of the season saw Dortmund play 9th placed Mainz, while Bayern would travel to 10th place Cologne. Neither had anything to play for. It was a party atmosphere in Dortmund. It was as if they'd already won the title, and it would be their first in 11 years, and Marco Reus has described it as like the perfect day to celebrate. The weather being 25 degrees, it was sunny, and everyone was in a good mood. And, the mood wasn't really dampened that much when Bayern took an early lead against Cologne through Kingsley Coman. But in Dortmund, things would take a rather sour turn quickly, when they would get off to the worst start possible and Mainz opened the scoring through an Anders Hansch Olsen header. Dortmund would then start to flood forward, as you could really sense some panic starting to settle in here. They would be given a lifeline when Rafael Guerreiro was fouled, so up stepped Haller instead of the usual penalty taker Emre Can. It's worth noting Can was on the field here as well. But you could see that the narrative was going to write itself. Haller comes in and saves Dortmund, and what a fairy tale ending. The penalty would be saved by goalkeeper Finn Dahlmann. And then things would go from bad to even worse when Mainz made it 2-0 through Karim Onisiwo, meaning within 30 minutes, Dortmund were already 2-0 down. They would then pile on the pressure and would have a wealth of chances throughout the game, but nothing would just seem to go in for them. And this feeling started to settle in. This may not be Dortmund's day. 73% possession, 29 shots, 14 on target. Dortmund really went for it. And they would get one back in the 69th minute to make it 2-1, setting up a potential possibility for a comeback. And then the noise level at the Westfalenstadion rose even more when Dejan Ljubicic scored an equaliser for Cologne against Bayern to make it 1-1. Meaning even if Dortmund lose, they would win the title. Dortmund continued to push for that equaliser just to make it that little bit more sure. However, it would go suddenly very quiet, more akin to as if someone had died, as Jamal Musiala would score a late winner for Bayern to beat Cologne 2-1. Now, the game in Dortmund wasn't over, so it was hypothetical that Dortmund could make a comeback, and Edin Terzic's side continued to push for it, and in the 96th minute, Niklas Süle would score the equaliser with Mainz, but it was too little, too late. Dortmund would finish second, behind Bayern on goal difference. And it is the most Dortmund thing to happen to Dortmund, most likely in their history. They had a simple game that they needed to win and they failed. while Bayern went into it with the mentality that, we're not going to win this. And they ended up winning it. And I think that this also just kind of sums up the differences between these two clubs. I mean, Bayern, the perennial winners, didn't stop trying to win even when it looked like it wasn't possible, while Dortmund just wilted under all the pressure. And then the feeling after that game was if someone had died. It's just quiet, and it kind of gives you this weird feeling watching it happen. And Dortmund, actually, you can make the argument that Dortmund haven't really recovered from that since, as well, especially in their league form. Obviously, the following season, they made it to the Champions League final, which they lost to Real Madrid. Again, you can make the argument for that game there was a period where Dortmund really should be leading. While their league position since have been 5th, where they only made it to the Champions League because of the 5th place, Germany having the 5th place rule, and then 4th, where they made it into the Champions League thanks to a monumental comeback in the second half of last season. And, as a wise man once said, it's the history of Dortmund. They always miss something at the end.